Thank you, everybody who has joined the webinar. You are more than welcome, and special thanks to our speakers, to Paul and Matthew, our externals, and also to Keith and Dave, who will be speaking from a LEEA perspective. As Lee has just suggested, this is the third in our supply chain webinars. This is the idea that we can speak a little more in depth when we're speaking about lifting in particular industries that our broader lifting industry serves. And so we've talked previously about port logistics, we've talked about oil and gas, and today we're talking about the entertainment sector and the crucial role that lifting plays in that. So without further ado, welcome to Global Lifting Awareness Day, the very first bit of content that we've been putting out into the ether today, and we turn over the time to Mr. Fulcher. Paul Fulcher, the time is yours.
Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the first session on today's webinar. And as Ross Maloney has mentioned, today's focus on this webinar is about the entertainment industry. My name is Paul Fulcher and I'm the founder and managing director of Rigging Services. The theme of our presentation is to do with post-COVID requirements for training new recruits into the entertainment sector. Well, you may wonder why this theme. The main reason for this theme is that, like many industries, the entertainment industry was hugely impacted by COVID-19. It was one of the first sectors to feel the effects as events abruptly came to a close and events and venues shut down. And it was also one of the last sectors as the world starts to ease restrictions. It's one of the last sectors to come out of these restrictions. So it's been heavily impacted. Also as well, the entertainment industry, it's fueled, it's powered by a large army of freelance contractors. Now these contractors, they found themselves instantly out of work, and in many cases without assistance from government because of their status. And even those that were salaried, they found themselves on long-term furlough, redundant, or at best employed, but in a sector that now is under threat from job security. So as a result, a mass exodus occurred within this industry, where some with decades of experience, they left and they've not returned. So as the sector starts to return back to a near normal, we're now experiencing a huge skills shortage. So that's the effect of COVID on our sector, but we're still being impacted on this because of the lack of skills, hence the need for training new recruits. Well, there's always been a need for training in any sector, and the event sector is no different. Rigging Services has been providing training on rigging for more than 25 years. And throughout this 25-year period, we, like many other training providers, have had a contributive role in upskilling the workforce in the live event sector. But there's now a new need. There's a need to train new recruits as they enter our sector. Well, you could ask, why is there a particular need to train newcomers? And there's a simple reason, really. The entertainment sector is quite different to other sectors. Although there are lots of similarities, there are lots of differences. We're going to just talk about three. The first one, as you can see on screen, is unlike the rest of industry, we deliberately lift loads above people. It's quite unique in this sector. Around the world, you're told, don't do that. In the event industry, we have to do that. We're either lifting loads above people, or we are lifting people. We're flying performers. So it's not uncommon in the event sector, across all set parts of the event sector, that this is what we do. Another thing that's not uncommon is a lot of lifting operations in the entertainment industry involve multiple lifting operations. As you can see in these two images here, on the left-hand side, this is the velodrome in the London's Olympic Park, a 44 hoist synchronized lift. The image on the right-hand side of your screen, this particular venue in Holland, over this weekend, 1,000 hoists were rigged in the stadium, many of which you can see they've been rigged and they're working above the audience. So this is quite unique and different to what you may experience in your sector. The third difference is that quite often what we do in entertainment is live. And when you've got a live performance, whether it's a theatre production or here a concert, this is a shot from Glastonbury, you don't get a second chance at a live event. Build times are very short. You have only often hours to work with, not days, to install the rigging, the video, the LED, the sound, and so forth. So with all these factors and features that hallmark the entertainment industry, these, would you agree, make it quite unique? And there is a need for any new recruits, as well as the existing ones, to be skilled and highly trained technicians. I'm sure you'd agree as well that training helps to ensure a competent workforce. So that means that even if you're working in the industrial sector and you want to transition through to the event sector, further training is required, because the skill sets you've already adopted won't make you a competent rigger, slinger in the event sector. There are other skill sets that you need to learn. And here comes the challenge. The challenge is there's a need for training, but what do I have to learn? And how can I ensure that what I learn is correct? Well, on the subject of what is there to learn, there is an overlap between general industry and the entertainment sector. You would expect, for example, a person working in the event sector has to know the competencies of health and safety, general health and safety, the standards that apply to the sector they're working in. Working at height. Also, as well, we touched on it before, there is a unique culture in the entertainment sector. You need to grasp and embrace that culture. You also need a very detailed knowledge of the equipment that you work with. And this, again, in event can be quite different to what you're used to. Also, as well, your rigging skills and techniques. Whilst they may have held you in good stead in the industrial sector, they're quite different skill sets that you need when working in event. For example, this doesn't suggest that you don't do this in industrial rigging, but in entertainment rigging, you need to understand rigging plots, load tables, angular forces, other forces such as compression, tension, bending, shear, load distribution, different types of load, mathematics, physics, the principles of mechanics and the principles of materials of science, and so on. The list is quite endless. As we mentioned before, how the sector works culturally. Now that's just a summary, just a tiny little glimpse of what there is to learn, and I don't want to underestimate what there is to learn. There is some overlap, but there's also a huge difference if you transition from the industrial sector into event, or if you're joining entertainment for the first time. So on to the question, how can I ensure that what I learn is correct? Well, it's a good start point. Because you're on this webinar, it suggests that you're either already a LEEA member, you're considering being a member, or you work with a LEEA member. And I'm sure you will agree that LEEA is renowned for its high quality training. And some of the training requirements to work in the event sector will be met by some of those LEA courses. But for other sector-specific requirements, I'd recommend that if you are an operative, if you're a rigger, if you're a supervisor or an employer, that just as you've chosen LEEA for dependable training in some areas, that you're also as discerning when it comes to how you supplement your existing training with training for the event sector. For example, there's a lot of online content where you could self-train, you could say. I'd exercise a word of caution if you attempt to do that. Whilst there's a lot of content out there, some may be accurate and up to date, but a lot is also unreliable. Plus as well, online free content does not demonstrate a proven record of training, development, and assessment of your competencies. So just as you found LEEA for your training, also search for reputable providers of training for the event sector and ways to get assessed as to your competency. That's easier said than done. In the UK, for example, we are quite blessed. There are only a few providers of entertainment sector training for rigging, but the trade associations also offer support as well. So if you're looking for reputable training and assessment, I suggest you look for those authorized assessors that can actually demonstrate and assess your competency. LEEA can help you with that. We can help you to bridge that gap with where you can find that training. Today's opening session, it's not to promote rigging services as your one-stop shop, it's to just highlight that there is a training need for people that transition into the event sector. So seek their guidance and seek their advice as to where you can go for dependable training and assessment. Looking at the attendance list for this morning's seminar, we can see that there's people from Europe, from the Middle East, from Australia, from Indonesia, South Africa, and South America. So for some of you, it will be more difficult to access this sort of training than others. But please don't let that be the reason for not finding formal training. Formal training, as we can see on this last screen, it can fill in any gaps in your current knowledge. It can inculcate best practice for this sector. It can help you to communicate correctly with your peers that work in the same sector. And importantly, it can help you to develop a culture that is necessary for working in the event sector. So to conclude, the industry has been hit hard by COVID. It's now returning back to normal. Globally, there is a huge training need. This presentation just simply shows you a little insight into how the event sector works, but it also highlights this global training need and demonstrates LEEA's willingness and offer to help assist that gap, to bridge that gap in finding reputable training and assessment. Thank you for listening.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Fascinating, and it's I'm never going to get over how affected the entertainment sector was during the COVID pandemic. As Paul said, it seemed to be the first to feel the effect, and likewise the last to come out of it. Still have my commiserations as a sector. So we're going to move now on to Matthew Wheeler, who's going to present to us. So Matthew, time is yours.
Hi, good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I'm going to look at, leading on from where Paul was explaining, the design, the artistic needs, and how lifting equipment feels that kind of comes into that picture, and how, as a rigger, we need to utilise that. What I'm looking at here is a very basic kind of how we as a theatre put our show on. So often we'll start the development of the show, we'll get a white card model delivered to us, and it is exactly what it says. It is a very basic model, but it demonstrates the concepts and the scenic elements and the flown elements and what the director and the designer's vision is of what they'd like to deliver on stage. We as a technical team, that will be taken away, it will be analysed, there'll be a feasibility drawn up, and that information will need to be passed back to the creative team. And you as the rigger are going to have to be involved in that process and try and work out, can we deliver this? Is this feasible? Can I lift this? Can I move this? Feeding back into what Paul was saying about, it's about your training, your knowledge base, looking at these really out of the box ideas and working out with everything you've got, can that be delivered on stage? It will then move on to a final model showing, which will be a much cleaner, it'll be a very impressive model in a lot of cases, full colour, normally in 1:25 scale, and that will then be the director and the creative team going through the model, demonstrating what they would like on the scene changes, and it will be really easy. They'll have a nice bit of cardboard and they'll pick it up and go, this bit disappears and this bit arrives. And that's where you need to continue that process with your creative team in developing your solutions. And we're going to look at that a little bit in a second. Eventually, you head into what we call pre-production or pre-prod, which then leads to the fit-up. Pre-prod will sometimes overrun with what we currently have on stage, and we'll start to rig and lay out the roof and start putting points and start rigging the equipment for the scenic elements and getting the stage prepared for the show. And then during fit up, that'll all come together, and eventually, hopefully, we get to a preview and an opening night, and then eventually to our press night and a show run. And I think on from what Paul said, often Glastonbury and the like, they're quite quick events. In my sector, we'll often run a show for 3 months. Often shows can run for years. So there's different things to be considered there as well. So here we go. Many solutions used within the industry require an in-depth understanding and the designer's vision, so that the delivered solution meets their needs whilst maintaining a safe system of work. So some of what you're going to be asked to deliver, you're going to be given sometimes not in the ideal order that you would like in your process, but you need to evaluate that, use your skill set and work out what you can deliver safely to achieve what they would like on stage. I've used it before and I quite like it and it's been well received. You might not, your competency isn't knowing everything, but knowing when you need to stop and when you need to consult with others to deliver your safe solution on stage. And that's using the likes of maybe rigging services, LEEA, and any of your suppliers you have in your neck of the woods to help you work out what you can deliver safely on stage. So how do we go through this process with our productions and how do we look at putting those together? Well, you're going to start with the artistic vision, the designer's vision. From there, you're going to have your feasibility. You need to start looking at your weight of your scenic elements that have to be flown. Lighting and sound and audio visual is now a very big thing with either quite large projectors, many of them, or LED walls. And it's a bit of an odd one, but we have things called props, which are where you might have lots of add-ons and bits and pieces which have to travel with the scenery when it's being flown or moved around the stage. Often we'll come across performer flying, and we have to think about all of those things. In our venue and in many others, your key point of contact as the rigger is going to be your production manager. You might not always interact with the designer directly, so you're having to liaise with your production manager, and that's very important. And it's, I think, ultimately very important as a rigger that you deliver to an agreed remit with your cost and with your time. You manage that expectation. And again, we'll move on and we'll have a little look at that in a second. So what helps inform our role in delivering the solution? Well, each scenic element, and unlike some of you guys who are coming from other sectors, we might be doing many lifts with multi-points, and it might be various bits of scenery that need to either interact together or during low light conditions or with many casts on stage. So all of those need consideration. We need to try and ascertain the weight. In some cases, your scenery won't be built. You'll still be looking at your model and you'll be having to work with your carpentry shop, your metal workers, the sound and lighting departments and the projection department to work out, is this just a plain piece of scenery, or have we now got lots of lights, lots of scenery, lots of sound equipment that's going to be mounted to it? How quickly does it need to move? Which will then hopefully potentially dictate your method of lift, because we have lots of options. We have winches, we have chain hoists, we have fly bars and manual lifting equipment depending on the weight, where it is on stage. We have a wonderful thing on our plans which is called a no-fly zone. It's areas of the stage which are dedicated for normally lighting positions, or underneath a catwalk, or underneath an area where it's very difficult to put lifting equipment. Most productions will try and put something underneath there. You as a rigger need to either try and find your solution or manage that expectation. And it's that very important word again, managing the expectation of the production manager. How's it built? Sometimes you'll have a timber scenery, sometimes you'll have steel, sometimes we'll use aluminium, and sometimes it will be a mix of those construction methods. Again, it comes back to where's your knowledge base, and assisting the production team in being able to evaluate that piece of scenery and that design, hopefully at planning level, to make sure that you end up with a piece of scenery you're happy to lift and you know is going to be coming in at a weight which you can manage when it arrives on stage. Is it live flown? When we use the term live flown, we're referring to a piece of scenery which is flown in view of the audience. That sometimes changes your lifting method. You could have a large scenic element, a large wall, which is flown in a blackout during an interval, and your speed, your method of lift isn't as important as when it is live flown in audience view. You could use a chain hoist or automated chain hoist, but they can bounce a piece of scenery. It can look a bit ugly. So you might be wanting to use your winch to have a much smoother operation when you fly it out. So there's that consideration. How does the cast interact with it? More than once and on regular occasions, which can get quite complex, is you'll have maybe an actor who stands on your piece of scenery as it flies in, as it flies out, or there might be doors or what we refer to as sliders, which will need to be moved or closed before the item is flown or moved on stage. And that becomes quite important, because obviously if you're flying a large piece of scenery in over the top of lots of performers, that needs very careful management. And that also means that you need to interact with your production manager again. That means you might want to push for rehearsal time for your automation operators to make sure that you're happy with that. In amongst all of that, you've still got to maintain the artistic needs and visions of the show without the artist feeling like they're having that compromise. So there's a lot of information you're going to be gathering to help align that. And normally, and apologies if there's any lighting and sound guys, but you normally discover that there's a few extra lights and a few extra speakers appear, and you need to be aware of that. And that comes back to your experience, as Paul was saying, that you know that you need to make provision potentially to have a little bit of an additional weight that you can add potentially to your piece of scenery and still be safe. And all of these are going to enable you to apply your safety protocols that the venue use, the standards, and inform the cost and time of that equipment and how you're going to utilize that information. You need to pass that information on. So if the rigger's taking all that information on board, you're going to be focusing that information through the production manager, I've said before, but you will at some point potentially liaise with the designers and creatives. As the rigger, you need to manage what and how you manage those meetings. The production manager might be very interested in knowing that you're delivering to the standards, and which standards does he need to be asking for when he's hiring or looking to buy a piece of lifting equipment to come into the building. The designer, they're not so interested. They want to know that you're using a really nice small steel cable, that it's going to be outside. What colours are steel cable? Oh, I wanted a bit of chain to lift that bit of scenery. Okay, what kind of size chain were you thinking about? It's all those conversations you have with the designer you need to take away and then discuss with your production team and your production manager and go, I need to use this size bit of chain because I need this standard. And it's all that information. And you've got to build that picture. Often you'll still be working off your white card, you'll still be working with your draftsman. So that communication is really important, that you ensure that you are focusing that information in ways that the production team can utilize properly, and you all end up with that really important thing, which is managing the expectations. and this is really, really important. You have to agree what is your deliverable. You have to agree what is your time. Typically, it may be, as you see in the note, you require a flown element to move in 30 seconds. You want to look at, can I offer a window? So I can go as quickly as 23 seconds, or I can go as slow as 120 seconds. And that remit of whatever you're lifting and however you choose to move it is quite important, because that gives the production manager a window they can offer the creative team. If they go, can it go faster? The production manager already has that information to go, yeah, we can push that window a little bit. Can it go slower? You can push that window the other way. Have you made an allowance for some extra speakers, extra lights, another projector? Is there space in the fly tower, in the area that the equipment's being flown, to add those things in? And if you have that agreement and you have that remit and you're managing that expectation, and that's no easy feat for the rigger to be doing that, we can then move that forward quite nicely with the production team, and everyone can be kind of happy and know that they're going to get what they require when the show starts to open. Rigging is often called a dark art within the entertainment industry, and I kind of feel there's a bit of a shift there. So in this slide, I've said rigging is often out of sight and out of mind. The lifting gear must be operating in line with your best practice, safety protocols, whatever your standard is. But artistically, a faulty speaker or lighting fixture will be picked up very quickly by the artistic team. They'll see that and they'll go, hold on, Bob's meant to be in a bright white light and he's not got any light on him at all. And they'll pick up on that, and there'll often be time there for those departments, because of the visual impact, to deal with that. Lifting gear, it often works unseen in the entertainment industry. It's often in the roof, it's often out of sight. And that's the aim of what I'm delivering often on stage. But as the rigger, you need to make sure that your production team are aware that if you have complex equipment in the roof, you will need time to get maintenance. You will need time during the show's run to manage, look after and maintain that equipment, because whilst it may be operating fine, a steel cable which is deteriorating, if that goes unnoted, could cause you problems with your winch. It could birdcage and jam up. It could cause any number of issues. And if you haven't put those remits in place for your rigging team to be able to get in, look at and have time to run the cues, run the scenery and check the operation of that scenery, that's really important. And sometimes that gets missed. And in a busy production period, that as we tend to have, that's also quite a balancing act, because you'll need lighting sessions, you'll need sound sessions, you'll need projection sessions. There might even be a fight time allocated, fight choreography time allocated on stage. But the sessions with the performer flying, the sessions for maintenance need to be made clear as one of your kind of agreed remits, your parameters. You're going to say, I'm going to try and keep that there. We need to protect this time. And there needs to be flexibility. It might be you have to do it overnight. It might be you have to do it early in the morning. But if that's known from the get-go, you can make sure your team are allocated effectively, and you have the guys with the right training in the right places to be able to manage the systems during the day and or at night carry out the maintenance. So it's really, really important that whilst it's not the dark art I think it often was, because as Paul has said, much of what we do is crosses over greatly between all lifting sectors. The dark art is, it goes in the roof and people tend to leave it there and not pay attention to it. And that's where you as a rigger need to make sure that you maybe your 3-month or your 6-month or your 12-month inspection, depending on the show's run, is maybe brought forward a lot shorter, depending on speed, weight, and the implication of what you're doing. And that kind of brings me to the close, really, of where I was at with trying to give you a brief overview of the production period, how the production period comes in, and the kind of things the rigger needs to be aware of. And for me, if you can take anything away, it's the managing the expectations, making sure that your remit that you agree to deliver on stage for us during production is deliverable, and everyone understands the time constraints and what you need to do to achieve that. Your training, as Paul's discussed, as the next two speakers are going to discuss from LEEA, the application of the standard to that. You need that information, you need that two-way street of communication with your production team and your artistic team to ensure you deliver a safe, reliable lifting solution into your building for that course of that show's run. And there we are. I think I will hand back to Ross now to pass on to the next speaker.
Perfect. Thank you, Matthew. That's fascinating. Both presentations have been so interesting from a non-special to a non-specialist. And so I've got a couple of questions that I'll ask, and I'll just throw them out to you, Paul, and to you, Matthew, and you can look sort of anxiously at each other and hope that the other picks it up. So my first question follows on from a question that was posted in the chat, and this relates to transferability of skills. So there are rigging, there's rigging training and rigging that happens in other parts of the lifting industry, particularly in relation to oil and gas, etc., is a good example. So is there transferability between those rigging skills and the rigging skills that are looked for routinely within the entertainment industry?
I can answer that. The simple answer is yes, of course. If you are a trained slinger, rigger, banksman in the oil and gas industry, undoubtedly you would have been trained in some of the same skills that are used in the entertainment sector. But there are differences in the way we approach work. One thing that immediately comes to mind is that often with entertainment rigging, we have to create what's called a rigging point where there wasn't one before. You're in a venue, maybe in Matthew's theatre, it's pre-organised and Matthew knows where his rigging points will be. If you go into a venue, then that might not be the case. So you've actually got to create a temporary rigging point, and that would require different skill sets than you may be used to in the industrial sector, in oil and gas, for example's sake. Plus, as well, as we mentioned in the first presentation, within the entertainment sector, multiple lifting, it's commonplace. And that doesn't always happen in the industrial sector. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not as common. Whereas in event rigging, it's the order of the day. Every event often involves multiple lifting. So you've got synchronized lifts, you've got load distribution calculations to factor in as well. So in that sense, you would need, in our opinion, extra training to factor in those scenarios. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Matthew?
What I would say, and something strangely actually I was chatting with Keith, who's going to speak in a little while, was the use of the lifting gear. The lifting gear has a set of parameters. It has a set of the way it's designed to work. A bow shackle does a certain operation. You can have 2 loads in the bow, you can have 1 load in the pin. That kind of universal understanding of lifting gear is transferable across both the industries, going both ways, in the lifting equipment that's being used in a safe manner, a shackle, a wedge clamp, steel cable, how those things are being operated. If you have a set of experience with using the equipment, you're going to be able to look at a rig and go, either that might not be, I mean, riggers are quite picky with each other at times on stage, but that might not be the way I'd rig it, but is the equipment, is there component compatibility, are the components in that load path working the way they're designed to work, even if I don't recognise necessarily the mythology behind how the entire lift order is put together.
Great, thank you very much. There are some other questions coming into the chat, but in the interest of time, we're going to deal with those afterwards. I've got one last question to ask. So if you put a question in, don't worry, we'll deal with it afterwards, and we'll distribute that intelligence following this webinar. The last question, however, to Paul and to Matthew, I guess, is given that it's Global Lifting Awareness Day and part of the day is to attract our next generation of recruits, how do people get into rigging in the entertainment sector? Is there a traditional route, or where do you go to find your next generation of recruits? What advice would you give to the next generation? Please, Matthew.
I think the path into any theatre is there's a lot of casual work, as Paul alluded to, that require training. Is that path in is to go, can I come and crew at your venue? Can I come and assist? It's from there, it's that whole thing of, because it is so much freelance work, you're really only as good as your last kind of job. Have a chat with the guys, work hard, knuckle down, say, actually, can I help out on the loading with the lifting gear? I prefer to be doing that than something else, and start those conversations and try and work your way through and kind of try and get that hands-on experience in trying to go, I want to focus on this side of the operation, and have you got anything there, or can I just come in and start work? It's how I picked up some of my guys. Is they started on stage maybe as a casual, and they said, oh, I need another pair of hands, and then they've come and helped my team out. They've got on well, we've liked them, so we've called them back a few times until they've ended up kind of a part of the team. So it's kind of put your name forward, step up, try and get into your local venues, try and get into your local rigging company, even if it's shoving flight cases to begin with.
Thank you. Yeah, Paul, please.
Yeah, just adding on to what Matthew said, it also varies within each subsector in entertainment. Some are more closed than others. In TV and film rigging, for example, although there is a union called BEC2, it's quite often who you know, and similar to theatre, you may start off crewing within the TV and film sector, and you've got to really earn your stripes. It's not necessarily always about your formal training. It's about how you work with your co-workers. The timing, though, for rigging in general, the timing is quite good if you want to get into the industry, because there now is actually an apprenticeship. In England, at least. If you're elsewhere in the world, can't help you there. But in England, there are 2 apprenticeships, actually. One for the live event rigger itself, and as LEEA have announced recently, there is the lifting equipment technician apprenticeship. So there are a couple of formal structured routes that you could take, and that's also a nice route to get into the industry. But in our case, it's similar to Matt. Quite often we get emails or phone calls from people that are outside of the industry asking, what can I do to get in? And typically it's often, come and work for us, crew for us, start at the basics, and we'll teach you the rest in a vocational sense.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, particularly to Mr. Fulcher, who sits on the LEEA board. He's extremely on message and pushing the apprenticeship that LEEA's been working on. So thank you for that shout out. So thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Paul, for your presentations. We're going to move now to Keith. Keith's presentation is going to come up on screen. He's going to talk to us about some of the work that's going on in standards relevant to this part of the industry.
Good morning. My name's Keith Tonge. I'm part of the LEEA Technical Services team. The team provide basically advice and guidance on a range of subjects that includes like technical inquiries, legislation, safe use, design, maintenance, inspection, thorough examinations on lifting equipment and height safety equipment. So how is this carried out? We have technical committees, working groups. One of the working groups is the entertainment working group. We have publications such as the LEEA capsule. We have guidance documents on a range of subjects. We have frequently asked questions, which are available on our website. We also have a triage system where you can send in questions to our technical advice. They get answered, and all that helps to us to generate into information that we can feed back into standards. And we actively participate in ISO, CEN, BSI and ASME standards. Can we have the next slide, please? So why is lifting important to the entertainment industry? So, sorry, excuse me, got a technical problem here. So, well, why is it important? Well, to quote a colleague of mine, without lifting, the entertainment industry would grind to a halt. Theatre, television and film sets would not be moved. Lighting rigs would remain on the stage and not above it. So what is carried out to the stage and make the demanding entertainment industry safe and with a level of consistency, quality, and sorry, could I have the next slide, please? So what we're talking about here is globally that there are many standards available to assist, let's say, Matthew's area, where he's working out a methodology for the set. So we've got recently published, has been the EN 17206 Entertainment Technology Standard. This is for machinery for stages and other production areas. And that's for safety requirements and inspections. It goes through quite a range of the equipment, everything from lifts, hoists, flying performers. So EN 17206 is published, but just to make you aware of these standards, EN 17206 is currently under review to address comments. It's been in use for a number of years, a couple of years now, and there are a lot of comments, and they're also trying to attain harmonized status throughout the European Union. Can we have the next slide, please? So what other standards are there? EN 17206, again, there's a part 2 to this, and this is safety requirements for stands and truss lifts of stands. So you've got your these stands basically for lifting things into position. You can use them, as Paul alluded to, with multiple lifts for the same load. Again, they try to put this into a standard so that you're working in a certain way, not to take away from the artistic points of it. It's just to do everything safely, and that every venue has the same type of approach to it, which would help with people's training. So what else have we got? And I think this one, it's actually only in its draft stage. I think it's gone to public comment now. PREN 17795. This will definitely help, I think, with lifting and motion operations in the event industry. So as Matthew alluded to earlier, you do have a lighting designer, you normally have a scenic designer, and you also have a sound designer. Now, do you actually have a rigging and lifting designer? Or, as I think Matthew alluded to, it's generally, lifting equipment is generally forgotten about. And that's not just in the entertainment industry. That is also in industry itself. Nobody bothers until with cranes, lifting equipment until they go wrong or they're not available. That's when the rigging and lifting people are involved. If once it's gone wrong, you've got to put that right fairly quickly, or as Paul alluded to, you only get one chance. So this standard, the 17795, it's a methodology of what you do to, you know, the process of the lifting and motion operations. It's giving you a route to go through to have a look at what you need for that for your particular event. So another one, it's actually just got approval as a new work item proposal, is part 3 of 17206, which is unmanned aircraft systems for stages and other production areas. So that's safety requirements and inspections again. I think with this, it's the safety requirements is obviously from the flying part of the drones, shall we call them. But basically, what you're talking about there with inspections, currently, it's just going to be visual inspections. I haven't seen a drone yet, and I have seen quite a few, where they walk around with a torque spanner and they can be, you know, used to check security of fixings, etc. But visually, they're getting very good. Obviously, they can fly loads around, but they do have a number of problems with flight times, etc., load capacity. But I think that technology is coming along. So what they're doing at the SEN level is looking at it from what is available now and anything for future proofing for the drone systems or unmanned vehicles. Now, I'm actually only looking here at some of the SEN standards, which are European based, but obviously there are a lot of worldwide or global standards, ANSI standards, produced a lot by ESTA in North America. They go through a huge amount of equipment. It goes from E1.1 right through to E1.69. Now, these are available from ESTA, and obviously it's an area where we're looking at, and again, there's other standards, and there's 1 or 2 Australian standards in this area. But I think overall, in industry, in regular industry, yes, there are a lot of standards. I think with the entertainment industry, it is catching up, but the standards are being written by experts who have an in-depth knowledge of the entertainment industry, allied with people who do know about the lifting equipment. So I think it's a good mix between this, and I think it's a good idea if you feel you're an expert in this area to get involved with these standards. So could we have the next slide, please, LEEA? So there's just 1 or 2 other little standards here, which EN 17115, specifications for the design of manufacture of aluminium and steel trusses. This is a standard where I'm sure everybody in the entertainment industry use steel and aluminium trusses. It's on virtually every stage I've ever seen. So that's just a brief overview of some of the standards that are being worked on at the present. I actually sit on most of those standards, and I'm sure Matthew does as well. Yes, he does. So could we have the next slide? So with the LEEA technical services, we do have contact. You've got technical inquiries. You can send in your inquiries to technical advice. We have the LEEA capsule, which is freely available for information. There's also LEEA publications, and you've got the two website addresses there. And we also have LEEA frequently asked questions. Again, those are available on our website. Members have access to a different set of those, but there are some freely available ones. Could we have the next slide, please? So that really concludes what I'm talking about. Just giving you a brief overview. Could spend all day talking about standards, but it's a little bit of a dry subject sometimes.
Perfect. Thank you, Keith. Thank you for that. And for attendees on the webinar, the feedback is just jump on the LEEA website. There will be an answer to a question that you hadn't even thought of. We'll move on. So Dave, you've got 5 minutes. If you pitch accordingly, time's yours.
2 seconds, just get this up. Okay, so kind of short push for time. I won't go through the whole presentation itself, but I will pick out some key elements which certainly Paul, Matthew, and indeed Keith have just already alluded to. I'm not doing there. Okay, duty holder responsibilities. This is typically going to be the scene, the production manager, the studio manager. They've got the responsibility for the overall safety of that particular site. They may not have the skill set. They can delegate downwards to certain subject matter expert. They need to ensure that these particular persons are got the required skill set to do what is being required or indeed asked from them. Someone who's a qualified rigger, slinger, and appointed person may not be duly qualified to carry out the thorough examination, the inspection of the equipment. Flip that on its head, then somebody who's carrying out the thorough examination and inspection may not be duly qualified to sling or rig the load. When it comes to being duly qualified, tickets, qualifications used extensively around the world in all areas of industry. Some of these do have an expiry date, so we need to make sure that the person, first of all, that the qualification is actually theirs, that it's not being duplicated, stolen, you know, from another person. Secondly, that it's in date, and third, that they are current and competent to carry out the task that's going to be asked of them. Skill fade is absolutely huge in all sectors of industry. As Paul mentioned, people stepped away due to the effects of COVID. They go away, do something else, and then step back in. Have they still got that same skill set, the same knowledge to be able to practically apply it with what they were doing many, many years ago? End users' responsibility, yes, we need to comply with instruction from the senior managers, provided we're qualified, competent to do so. If somebody asks you to do something where you're not duly qualified, then you do have the right to refuse. We also have a responsibility to ensure that we use the equipment for the way that it is intended to be used. Now, this doesn't just apply to the theatre, the entertainment industry. This is extensively throughout the whole of the lifting industry, where people try to come up with what's called an engineering solution. When they've got a particular problem, there's no particular way to correctly lift it, but if we start tying things in knots, putting bolts through to shorten the chain assembly down, or indeed using it beyond certain angles of use, or for fleeted applications where it's not designed to, yes, it may get past a particular problem, but there's the potential for obviously loss of the load. Training, I'm not going to go into any great depth. Is it important? Massively. But it needs to be suitable, sufficient. It needs to be specific to the task that's being asked of the person, and it also needs to be measurable. Now, training is a very, very good tool for building up the level of competency, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Just because you've got a ticket, a qualification, it doesn't mean that you're suitably experienced. Again, refreshing, as Paul mentioned, people stepping into the industry, starting at the bottom. You get the level of understanding, you work your way up, that's going to start enhancing your experience. Also, when people have problems later on throughout your career, then you can step back to what you've learned previously. Inspection intervals going to look very basically at 3. I'm conscious on the time. So pre-use inspection, before use, and ideally after use inspection, just as important as the periodic thorough examination. Normally limited to a visual functional inspection, it's confirming that the equipment is still safe to operate. Now, we've got maximum fixed periods, the 6 monthly, 12 monthly here in the UK, back to LOLA. An awful lot can happen in a minute, an hour, a day, let alone over those extensive periods. What I'll also mention is colour coding, or indeed ticketed tags saying that it's in date for its periodic examination. These are not to be used to ensure that it's still safe or indeed fit for purpose. The interim inspection, this can be used as an alternative to the maximum fixed periods based upon risk assessment, something along the lines of a written scheme of examination, for example. Can concentrate on safety critical areas where equipment is susceptible to high wear and tear, or indeed open to elements when used outside. In addition to this, as Paul mentioned, we're here in the UK and we're using lifting equipment for lifting persons. Then we go to the maximum fixed periods, which is 6 monthly. But what about when we're not lifting people, but the load itself is positioned over the audience where persons are present? Well, then why not reduce it down to the 6 monthly, or indeed bring it down to quarterly to mitigate against the risk? The periodic thorough examination carried out by a qualified competent person, it ensures that the equipment is safe, fit for purpose, and it meets all regional legislative requirements. Yes, we've got the 6 monthly, 12 monthly inspection here in the UK. Step down to Australia, then the textile slings being inspected every 3 months. Mainland Europe, then it's generally yearly. So be aware of the regional requirements. Inspection, 3 basic levels of inspection. You always inspect manufacturer's information. They've built it. They may state the discard criteria. An awful lot of this is common with regards to 10%, etc. If the manufacturer's not quoted it and the equipment's been built to the standard and the standard does give you the discard criteria, then we can go to the standard itself. In the absence of those two, then go with the recommendations as stated by us here at LEEA. What I really did want to spend an awful lot of time of, and I know we're overrunning, so I do apologise, is the lifting operations supervisor, the qualified, the competent person, the slinger, the rigger, the appointed person. Yes, they need to be duly qualified. They are required to plan all lifts. We can have a generic lift plan. However, if anything changes, then the lift plan must change to meet the additional needs. That lift plan basically becomes your RAMs, your risk assessment and method statement. It's allowing things to be lifted safely. The problem and the uniqueness, if you like, of the entertainment industry is the load is not always going to be the same. We're not picking up a perfect symmetrical load where the centre of gravity is bang in the middle. We've got weird and wonderful trusses with different lighting and sound systems on. So the centre of gravity could be shifted, which therefore may require additional hoists to either trim, stabilise or balance the load, or indeed to provide the extra lift capacity. We could also be using things like ballast to trim or balance the load. Well, again, that's also going to add weight to the load itself. And then we could be flying a performer. They could have an additional weight with a costume or indeed props. Everything in the load bearing path must be taken into consideration. This is not the physical load itself, the slings, the shackles, the hoist assembly. It's also the anchorage and indeed the building. Now, when we're doing fixed point lifting and we're doing something within a theatre, for example, or indeed in a studio, then the competent person, the in-house production manager, the studio manager will typically provide a matrix or a plot with regards to all the suspension points and the associated capacities that they may lift. The problem, again, with the uniqueness of the loads that we're lifting, multiple hoist position at one particular point, that can increase the loading on there. Catastrophic failure of the roof assembly leads to catastrophic failure of the whole load, bearing in mind the proximity of persons. If we are using winches, hoists, or indeed any form of braking system, whether that's travelling a load or indeed positioning a load in the first place, then it needs to be positioned in such a manner where it can't be tampered or indeed interfered with. So behind barriers, cordons, putting marshals out, or indeed locked out, tag out, isolated so that people can't start messing around travelling a load. Lifting in buildings, not so much of an issue as when we start lifting outside. So as Keith's mentioned very, very briefly, additional trussing work, need to make sure that that's strong enough. And when you start stepping onto the cruise ships, then we've also got dynamic loading with regards to sea states, which can affect the stability of the load, as again with wind loading, dynamic loading outside. Angles of slings, pretty self-explanatory. Most are written up on the tag itself. what I did want to mention, and I'm going to mention it very briefly, is eye bolts used extensively throughout the theatre industry. The majority, if not all of them, certain regions do differ. Again, Australia kind of leading the way, are marked for their axial working load limit, which is straight up and down. We use these for fleeted applications, then we need to provide or know what the relevant load factors is and reduce the capacity accordingly. So it's back to that effective replanning. Any equipment that does become defective or damaged does need to be disposed of in a responsible manner. So that's rendering it fit for further use. Cutting it up, destroying it, removing any forms of tags or labels, and then amending any necessary records afterwards. I do apologise for going like a belt-fed wombat. Just tried to squeeze in some of the key points there. What I will say is the actual full EUG seminar is going live on the LEEA website at 1:30, 13:30 hours today. Please go through that at your leisure. Any further problems, questions, get hold of me, and I'll quite happily arrange a Zoom session with any of you to go into any future depth.